It was the kind of night that legends are made of. Word had gotten out about Diddy's freak-off party, a no-holds-barred event that promised to be the party of the year, an exclusive celebration blending hip-hop royalty, bold moves, and an unpredictable energy that only two of the biggest moguls in the game could conjure. The venue was nothing less than iconic. Diddy had transformed an industrial warehouse in Brooklyn into an extravagant palace. Neon lights bounced off metallic walls, while velvet ropes separated the VIPs from the chaos. A giant stage loomed in the center, but there was something about the energy in the air that made it feel like anything could happen at any moment. A line had already formed outside, the buzz of anticipation almost as loud as the booming bass that leaked through the cracks in the walls. People knew they were about to witness something special. Diddy and Jay-Z, together on one stage, in one night. As the clock struck midnight, the first surprise arrived. Diddy's entrance. The doors swung open, and he walked in like a king, wearing a black leather jacket, custom-tailored jeans, and a set of diamond chains that sparkled under the lights. He threw his hands in the air, commanding attention, and instantly, the crowd went wild. His voice boomed over the mic, a signature mixture of charisma and mischief. "Y'all ready for the freak-off? This ain't no regular party. This is a celebration, a showdown, a place where we let loose," Diddy shouted, his smile as bright as his gold watches. "But don't get too comfortable. Jay-Z's in the building, and you know he's gonna bring that heat." The crowd erupted, and people started pouring into the venue, flooding the dance floor, ready for whatever came next. But Diddy wasn't just talking about his usual party anthems. Oh no, tonight was about the freak-off, a challenge to outdo each other in ways that nobody had ever seen before. A night where anything could happen. But just when everyone thought Diddy had the energy in check, Jay-Z slid into the scene. His arrival was quieter, more calculated, no flashing lights, no massive crowd of security, just the subtle force of his presence. Jay-Z walked in wearing a custom black hoodie, black jeans, and a gold chain that wasn't there to flaunt. His understated style made him almost blend into the crowd, but the moment he stepped onto the stage, it was clear who was in charge. "Yo, you know I had to pull up, right?" Jay-Z said with a smirk, microphone in hand. The crowd roared. Diddy, who had been hyping the crowd, now locked eyes with Jay-Z, giving him a nod of respect. "Hov's in the building. Let's see if he can handle the heat tonight," Diddy said, his voice dripping with playful challenge. The air in the room shifted. Everyone knew what this meant. The freak-off was about to get real. Diddy, ever the showman, called for the first round of the night, a dance-off. It wasn't just about the music. It was about who could command the room. He invited a few dancers from the crowd to take the stage. The first few contestants gave it their all, popping, locking, and flipping through moves that made the crowd cheer. But the true highlight came when Lil' Kim stepped in, wearing a fire-red outfit that matched her fierce energy. She took center stage and immediately launched into an explosive freestyle routine. Her hips swiveled, her body snapped to the beat, and her confidence was through the roof. The crowd was going wild. Diddy looked pleased, but then, out of nowhere, the lights dimmed. Jay-Z wasn't about to let the party slip too far into Diddy's territory. He tapped the mic, signaling a shift. "I know it's all fun and games, but this is my freak-off too," Jay-Z said, his voice low but full of authority. Then, a new beat dropped, a hard, hypnotic rhythm. Jay-Z grabbed the mic, and for the next few minutes, he didn't just rap. He performed. He hit the crowd with Encore and Hovey Baby, his delivery razor-sharp, each line cutting through the speakers like a blade. The energy in the room transformed. It wasn't just a party anymore. It was a battle. Diddy, ever the competitor, wasn't having it. He turned to his crew and motioned them to hit the stage. The next few hours were a blur of competitive energy. Diddy was setting the tone, throwing bangers like "I'll Be Missing You" and "Bad Boy for Life." He kept bringing out special guests like Macy and Faith Evans, getting the crowd hyped with throwback hits that had everyone in the venue rapping along. But Jay-Z wasn't backing down. With every song, his presence grew. He brought out Beyoncé, who performed a surprise duet with him, singing "Crazy in Love," sending the crowd into a frenzy. The air crackled with tension. On the stage, you could see Diddy throwing playful jabs at Jay-Z, each challenging the other to go harder. The reality TV star and the rapper were seen trying to pull off a joint dance move, but they were so tipsy from the tequila that it became a mix of twerking and uncoordinated jumping, which only added to the ridiculousness of the night. Kylie had her phone out, capturing it all for her Instagram, and it was clear. This wasn't the type of party you'd ever forget. Just when everyone thought things couldn't get crazier, Tom Hanks, yes, Tom Hanks, appeared out of nowhere, strolling through the crowd, wearing a Tommy Bahama shirt and sipping a pina colada. At first, no one was sure if it was a lookalike, but the second he cracked a joke about Forrest Gump being the only film where I get to run and get paid for it, the crowd erupted in laughter. Hanks was the perfect wild card, and the moment he grabbed the mic, he dropped an impromptu rap. The crowd was losing their minds. It was like the night had reached a point of absolute absurdity where literally anything could happen. But the real madness came when Miley Cyrus and Lil Uzi Vert appeared on stage, out of nowhere. Miley, dressed in a leather jacket and boots, grabbed the mic and launched into Wrecking Ball. But then, during the middle of the performance, Lil Uzi Vert took over the beat, rapping his verses from EXO Tour Lef 3 and encouraging Miley to go full-on wild. What ensued was a high-energy, full-on rock meets rap performance that sent the crowd into absolute hysteria. They were both singing, screaming, and dancing in perfect chaos. With the clock nearing 4 a.m., Diddy announced the final phase of the freak-off, a last-man-standing rap battle, with everyone still in the building invited to participate. In one corner, Jay-Z stood silently, cool and collected, while in the opposite corner, Kanye West glared at him, his eyes filled with unspoken tension. The crowd knew something big was about to happen. But then, as if on cue, Nicki Minaj barged onto the stage, her pink hair ablaze, and interrupted the standoff. "Nah, y'all ain't doing this without me," she yelled. And just like that, Nicki, Cardi B, Lil Kim, and Missy Elliott all took to the stage for a female rap cipher that had the room buzzing with excitement. As they freestyled, going bar for bar with each other, the guys stood back, applauding the raw energy. Meanwhile, Snoop Dogg, still on his vibe from earlier, was seen sneaking out to the VIP lounge with a handful of weed and a bottle of Patron, while a $AP Rocky and Kendrick Lamar casually took shots at the bar, debating whose verse on Loyalty was the hardest. Everyone was in their own world, but it was all part of the same freaky, wild night. By the time the sun came up, the freak-off was officially over, but the madness had only just begun. The after-party was at Diddy's private mansion, where the wild antics continued. People were jumping in the pool, throwing pillows and smoking cigars as the sun bathed the house in a golden glow. Diddy looked around at the chaos, laughing. "That's how we do it," he said, holding up a glass. "No rules, just legends." And with that, the night officially ended. Not with a bang, but with a chorus of wild memories that no one would ever forget. It was a crisp autumn night in New York City. The air was electric, filled with anticipation. Rumors had been swirling for weeks. Diddy was throwing the freak-off party of the decade, and if you weren't on the guest list, you might as well have been invisible. It was an exclusive, invite-only event where the only rule was that there were no rules. It wasn't just a party, it was an experience, a challenge, a celebration of excess and decadence. And for some of the most famous names in music, film, and fashion, this was the kind of event that defined their legacy. Located in a converted warehouse in downtown Brooklyn, the venue was a sprawling 10,000 square foot masterpiece of opulence. It looked like something straight out of a music video. Neon lights that flickered with electric hues, velvet ropes draped around VIP sections, gold chandeliers hanging like giant jewels, and a massive stage in the center with fog machines pumping thick clouds of smoke into the air. On the rooftop, a pool party was going down, with champagne flowing freely, while inside, the music had already reached a fever pitch. As the clock struck 11 p.m., the first set of celebrities arrived, each entrance more dramatic than the last. It was clear this was not just another party. This was Diddy's freak-off, and no one was here to play it safe. The first car to roll up was a black Maybach, the signature vehicle of Jay-Z, who'd just flown in from his latest business meeting. He stepped out of the car with that familiar swagger, wearing a tailored black suit and his usual understated gold chain. His wife, Beyoncé, emerged beside him, stunning in a figure-hugging gold dress that caught every bit of light. As the pair walked toward the entrance, the crowd buzzed with excitement. Inside, Diddy was already working the room, a glass of Don Julio in one hand, a platinum cigar in the other. As soon as he spotted Jay-Z and Beyoncé entering, he leaned into the DJ booth and switched the track. Dirt Off Your Shoulder blasted through the speakers, a nod to the legendary duo's long-standing friendship. The crowd went wild. Jay-Z and Diddy exchanged a quick handshake, their mutual respect palpable. "Let's make tonight unforgettable," Diddy said, his voice full of that signature energy. Jay-Z nodded, grinning. "We always do, Puff." But as the night unfolded, it was clear that no one, not even Jay-Z, would dominate the stage for long. This wasn't just about the music. It was about the chaos. And chaos was exactly what Diddy had planned. The first event of the night was a dance-off, and not the typical kind of dance battle you'd see on TV. No, Diddy's parties were about one thing, going absolutely wild. The rules. There were no rules. It was about who could push the envelope further, make the crowd scream louder, and bring the most ridiculous energy to the floor. First up, Migos jumped in. Quavo, Offset, and Takeoff stormed the stage, pulling off moves that seemed physically impossible. Their chain game was out of control, flashing as they dropped into a synchronized dance that had the crowd hyped. But just as they were getting the crowd to lose their minds, Cardi B slid onto the stage in a neon green bodysuit. Without warning, she spun and twerked in a way that only Cardi could, so wild that the crowd couldn't tell if she was dancing or just letting loose like there were no cameras in the room. "Hold up," she shouted to the DJ. "Turn this up." The beat dropped, and suddenly, Lil Nas X came running through the crowd in a pair of thigh-high boots and a glittering cowboy hat, ready to take over the dance floor with his own industry baby routine. By the time he finished, he had everyone in the building on their feet, hyping him up. But the real surprise came when Snoop Dogg strolled onto the stage in a smoking jacket, a blunt in one hand and a glass of Ciroc in the other. He didn't even bother with dancing. He just started freestyling, effortlessly smooth, as he got the crowd to chant his name. As the energy continued to escalate, Drake took to the stage. But this wasn't the Drake you'd see at a formal event. This was a version of him unhinged, absolutely electric. He grabbed the mic and immediately kicked off with God's Plan. But then he took a surprising turn. He started a live rap battle with Kanye West, who just slid into the room with his usual entourage, rocking a custom Yeezy hoodie and leather pants. The crowd couldn't believe it. Drake and Kanye weren't just spitting bars, they were directly throwing jabs at each other, their verses sharp and personal, causing the entire room to pause and wonder, was this real? Were they genuinely beefing? But in true Diddy fashion, this was all part of the show. In the corner of the room, Kylie Jenner and Travis Scott were in their own world, pouring shots of tequila and laughing while Sicko Mode blasted through the speakers. The reality TV star and the rapper were seen trying to pull off a joint dance move, but they were so tipsy from the tequila that it became a mix of twerking and uncoordinated jumping, which only added to the ridiculousness of the night. Kylie had her phone out, capturing it all for her Instagram, and it was clear. This wasn't the type of party you'd ever forget. Just when everyone thought things couldn't get crazier, Tom Hanks, yes, Tom Hanks, appeared out of nowhere, strolling through the crowd, wearing a Tommy Bahama shirt and sipping a pina colada. At first, no one was sure if it was a lookalike, but the second he cracked a joke about Forrest Gump being the only film where I get to run and get paid for it, the crowd erupted in laughter. Hanks was the perfect wild card, and the moment he grabbed the mic, he dropped an impromptu rap. The crowd was losing their minds. It was like the night had reached a point of absolute absurdity where literally anything could happen. But the real madness came when Miley Cyrus and Lil Uzi Vert appeared on stage, out of nowhere. Miley, dressed in a leather jacket and boots, grabbed the mic and launched into Wrecking Ball. But then, during the middle of the performance, Lil Uzi Vert took over the beat, rapping his verses from EXO Tour Lef 3 and encouraging Miley to go full-on wild. What ensued was a high-energy, full-on rock meets rap performance that sent the crowd into absolute hysteria. They were both singing, screaming, and dancing in perfect chaos. With the clock nearing 4 a.m., Diddy announced the final phase of the freak-off, a last-man-standing rap battle, with everyone still in the building invited to participate. In one corner, Jay-Z stood silently, cool and collected, while in the opposite corner, Kanye West glared at him, his eyes filled with unspoken tension. The crowd knew something big was about to happen. But then, as if on cue, Nicki Minaj barged onto the stage, her pink hair ablaze, and interrupted the standoff. "Nah, y'all ain't doing this without me," she yelled. And just like that, Nicki, Cardi B, Lil Kim, and Missy Elliott all took to the stage for a female rap cipher that had the room buzzing with excitement. As they freestyled, going bar for bar with each other, the guys stood back, applauding the raw energy. Meanwhile, Snoop Dogg, still on his vibe from earlier, was seen sneaking out to the VIP lounge with a handful of weed and a bottle of Patron, while a $1 AP Rocky and Kendrick Lamar casually took shots at the bar, debating whose verse on Loyalty was the hardest. Everyone was in their own world, but it was all part of the same freaky, wild night. By the time the sun came up, the freak-off was officially over, but the madness had only just begun. The after-party was at Diddy's private mansion, where the wild antics continued. People were jumping in the pool, throwing pillows and smoking cigars as the sun bathed the house in a golden glow. Diddy looked around at the chaos, laughing. "That's how we do it," he said, holding up a glass. "No rules, just legends." And with that, the night officially ended. Not with a bang, but with a chorus of wild memories that no one would ever forget. It was the night the city had been buzzing about for weeks. Diddy's freak-off party. It was notorious for being legendary, outrageous, and utterly unpredictable. Rumors had it that every big celebrity in Hollywood, New York, and beyond had received an invitation. Golden tickets, each one stamped with the words, "No rules, just legends." But no one truly understood what was about to unfold. What started as a celebration of excess and power would soon spiral into something unexplainable. The venue was a grand mansion perched on the outskirts of the city, hidden among the foggy hills. It was an old estate, one that seemed to have been abandoned for years. But tonight, the gates had swung open, revealing a sprawling mansion lit up like a nightclub. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary party venue. Expensive cars lined the driveway, and the sounds of music and laughter echoed through the night air. Jay-Z arrived first, stepping out of his sleek black Maybach, his usual cool demeanor present as ever. Drake, Travis Scott, and Lil Uzi Vert followed shortly after, all exchanging excited banter as they entered the mansion. They were prepared for an unforgettable night of music, drinking, and the occasional wild stunt. But there was something strange about the mansion, a heavy feeling in the air that they couldn't quite shake off. Inside, the party was in full swing. The lights were dim and flickering erratically, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. The music was loud, pulsing through the floor, and the air smelled like expensive cologne mixed with the unmistakable scent of something else. Something earthy, like old wood, dampness, and dust. It was unsettling, but no one said a word about it. After all, this was Diddy's world, and they were just here to have fun. Diddy entered the room with his usual flair. He was dressed in all black, his signature sunglasses on despite the low light, a glass of tequila in one hand, a cigar in the other. His presence was commanding. He approached Kanye West and Lil Wayne, who were already in the middle of an intense conversation about their next creative ventures. "You know what time it is?" Diddy said, smiling devilishly. "Tonight's about breaking the rules. Anything goes. But there's a twist. It's all about embracing the unknown." With that, the crowd cheered. But as Diddy clinked his glass, a strange sound reverberated through the house. A low, guttural hum, almost like the floor was vibrating. At first, no one paid it much attention. But then, Usher, who was dancing near the center of the room, froze mid-step. "Yo," Usher said, looking around, his eyes wide. "Did you guys feel that?" The music suddenly cut out. A tense silence filled the room. In that moment, the chandelier above them flickered, then went dark. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Suddenly the lights snapped back on, only they were dimmer now, casting the entire room in an eerie yellow glow. And that's when it happened. The DJ booth, which had been silent for a moment, suddenly started playing a low, eerie track, something haunting and unfamiliar. The beat was heavy, almost oppressive, and it had a strange rhythm that didn't quite match anything anyone had heard before. Tyler, the creator, always one to joke around, scoffed. "Man, who's messing with the sound system? This is some weird, spooky vibe." But as the bass dropped, something began to change in the room. The mood shifted from excitement to something darker. Kendrick Lamar stepped toward the center of the dance floor, trying to reclaim the energy. "Ayo, let's get back to it," he said, trying to keep things light, but his voice faltered. Lil Nas X joined him, but his usual swagger seemed off. Then came the whispers, faint, low voices calling their names from the corners of the room. Jay-Z looked around, his expression unreadable, as he felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure if it was the alcohol, the overwhelming sensation of being watched, or something deeper. And then, it happened. Travis Scott, standing by the bar, saw a reflection in the mirror that wasn't his own. It was a figure, tall, shrouded in a cloak of shadows, moving ever so slightly behind him. He whipped around to find nothing, but the reflection still stared back at him in the mirror, eerily watching. "Yo, did you see that?" Travis asked, his voice shaky. Everyone turned to see what he was talking about. The air had grown thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. As the night wore on, strange things began happening all over the mansion. Lil Uzi Vert was the first to run, his face pale and wide-eyed. He claimed he had seen something move in the hallway, a figure that seemed to follow him through the corridors. "I swear to God, I saw it. It was standing right there, just watching me," Uzi stammered, visibly shaken. Jay-Z and Kanye, usually unfazed by most things, exchanged worried looks. "It's probably just a prank," Jay-Z said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "No one's gonna ruin our night." But the atmosphere had shifted. Guests, who were once laughing and mingling, began whispering among themselves, their energy draining, the air growing heavier with every passing second. The mansion had a strange history, they now realized, the kind of rumors that people dismissed but never fully forgot. Stories of disappearances, haunted spirits, and strange occurrences had been passed around, but no one had truly believed them. Yet here they were, inside the mansion that felt as though it had never left the past, as if it were some kind of living, breathing entity that was now awakening. Things went from bad to worse as Drake and Kanye West began arguing, their voices rising above the unsettling hum of the house. Suddenly, a door to the basement flung open, and a cold, powerful gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging the party into darkness. The lights flickered one more time and then cut out entirely. Screams filled the room as shadowy figures began to materialize in the corners. Idris Elba grabbed Michael B. Jordan, trying to pull him toward the door, but it wouldn't open. They tried windows, all locked. The mansion had sealed them in. "What the hell is happening?" shouted Travis Scott, his voice echoing in the stillness. From the far end of the room, Snoop Dogg let out a loud, guttural laugh. It echoed strangely, too loud, too unnatural. "Guess the freak-off just turned into something else," he said, his voice dark, almost as though it wasn't truly his own. And that's when they realized they weren't alone anymore. One by one, the celebrities started disappearing into the mansion's labyrinth of rooms. The house itself seemed to be alive. Walls moved, floors creaked and shifted. Each celebrity found themselves facing their darkest fears. Lil Wayne saw shadowy figures from his past, while Usher found himself back in an empty, dimly lit version of his childhood home. Even Diddy, who had once controlled the chaos, felt powerless as he looked into a mirror and saw something staring back at him. A twisted version of himself, grinning maniacally. "It's too late to leave now," a voice whispered from the walls. The music continued to play, the haunting beats growing louder, drowning out their desperate shouts for help. As the night wore on, only a few remained, confused, terrified, and unsure of what was real anymore. When the lights finally flickered back on, the mansion was quiet. Diddy stood in the center of the room, staring blankly at the remaining guests. The others had disappeared without a trace, as if they'd never been there at all. He took a long drag from his cigar, his eyes dark and inscrutable. "Some parties you just can't control," he muttered under his breath. The freak-off had come to an end, but its effects would linger far beyond the night. And that's how the Diddy freak-off party turned into a nightmarish horror story. Legends would be told, but none would speak of the house again. After all, Some things, no matter how wild, are better left unseen. It was a typical Friday night in New York City when Lena, a promising model, received a glittering invitation she had only dreamed about. It was from none other than Sean "Diddy" Combs, the legend himself. The invitation was like nothing she'd ever seen before, a gold-embossed card with the words "Freak Off" written in bold, flashy lettering. Beneath that, in smaller text, it read, "A night where nothing is off limits. Anything goes." Lena had been to her fair share of high-profile parties, but this one was going to be different. The rumors surrounding Diddy's parties had always been whispered about in fashion circles, extravagant, wild, filled with celebrities. Some said they were almost too wild, more like something from a fever dream than a typical high society event. But this night, Lena was going to live out every model's fantasy. She could feel the electricity in the air even as she got dressed. This was the kind of night that promised everything. The venue was a mansion on the outskirts of the city. As the models arrived in their sleek black cars, they couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The mansion loomed ahead, an imposing structure that seemed almost too large for its surroundings. The air was thick with fog, the kind that didn't seem natural in a city like New York. As Lena and her fellow models walked through the marble hallways, they passed mirrors that distorted their reflections in strange, unsettling ways. The atmosphere felt wrong, but they didn't stop. They knew this party was one they couldn't afford to miss. Upon entering the main ballroom, the sight was as lavish as expected. The music was loud, the bass thumping in their chests, and the crowd was an electric mix of Hollywood stars, athletes, musicians, and models. Kendall Jenner, Bella Hadid, and Gigi Hadid were already in the center, surrounded by photographers and designers, looking every bit the supermodels they were. Rihanna was perched on a velvet couch, talking animatedly with Jay-Z, while Drake and Lil Wayne were in a corner, laughing over drinks. Everything seemed normal, or at least what passed for normal at a Diddy party. But there was an edge in the air, something Lena couldn't quite place. The lights flickered ominously for a moment, but when they returned, the music picked up again, and the party seemed to flow seamlessly, as if nothing had happened. After a few hours of mingling, Lena found herself drawn to the center of the room. Diddy, wearing his signature all-black ensemble, was on the stage. He was delivering one of his famous speeches. His voice boomed, exuding his usual charisma. "Tonight," he shouted, raising his glass, "we embrace the chaos. We break all boundaries. This is the night where you can truly let go." The crowd cheered, but it was then that Lena noticed something strange. Kendall Jenner was standing at the front of the stage, her smile frozen, her eyes vacant. It wasn't like her at all. She was usually lively, always laughing, but now she just stared ahead, unblinking. Lena shook it off as just another strange moment. The night was wild, after all. But when Gigi Hadid approached the stage, her eyes locked on Kendall, and they exchanged a look, something silent, eerie. Gigi seemed to shiver, despite the warm glow of the lights. "Are you okay?" Lena asked as Gigi passed her, but Gigi didn't respond. Her eyes were wide, almost glassy, as if she hadn't heard her at all. As the night wore on, things began to take a bizarre turn. The models, now a little tipsy and trying to shake off the unsettling feeling in the air, went to the bar. Rihanna was there, casually chatting with Travis Scott, but something was wrong with her. Her normally radiant energy seemed off, like a flicker of something darker had settled within her. Lena approached her. "Rihanna, you good?" Rihanna turned slowly, her eyes flicking toward her with a sharpness that made Lena freeze. Then with a slow smile, Rihanna answered. "You'll see. All of us will see." Before Lena could ask what she meant, a loud scream cut through the music. Bella Hadid was standing on a table, her hands gripping her head as if she were in pain. "Get them out of my head," she shrieked, her voice full of panic. "I can hear them." The crowd stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. But as Bella's scream died down, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. The room was plunged into darkness, and the air felt heavier than ever. The faint sounds of whispers began, low, almost inaudible at first. But as the silence stretched on, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to be coming from everywhere. Lena turned to look for her friends, but they had vanished into the crowd. In the shadows, she could see figures moving, their faces obscured, their postures unnervingly unnatural. And then she heard it, loud, clear, and unmistakable. "Help me." The voice was unmistakably Kendall Jenner's. Lena turned toward the sound, pushing through the crowd, her heart racing. She found Kendall, but the model she saw was no longer the person she recognized. Kendall's eyes were wide, pupils dilated, her hands clawing at her face as if she were trying to rip off her own skin. She was muttering incoherently, but no one around her seemed to notice. Lena grabbed Kendall's arm. "Kendall, it's okay. What's happening?" Kendall turned slowly, her mouth stretching into a grin that was far too wide, unnatural, like something out of a nightmare. "They're inside my head," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're inside, all of us." A chill ran down Lena's spine as the lights flickered once more. When they returned, the entire room was different. The walls appeared to stretch unnaturally, as though the house itself was alive, warping and twisting. The whispers grew louder, no longer just a few voices, but hundreds, swirling around the room. Lena looked around, and for the first time, she saw the true horror of what was happening. The celebrities, the models, the musicians, even Diddy, were no longer the glamorous figures they once were. Their eyes were vacant, their movements robotic, like marionettes controlled by something far darker. Rihanna was standing in front of a mirror, her reflection grinning back at her in a way that didn't match her expression. And then, it all clicked. The house wasn't just a venue. It was a trap. The freak-off party was never meant to be a celebration. It was a ritual, one designed to lure people in, feeding on their egos, their desires, their darkest impulses. The mansion had been built on ancient land, cursed for centuries, feeding off the energy of the powerful, using their fame and success as a vessel to resurrect something far older, something that thrived on chaos, excess, and indulgence. The whispers were voices from the past, drawn to the mansion's power, claiming the minds of the famous and the beautiful. They weren't celebrities anymore. They were vessels, puppets controlled by a force beyond understanding. Lena stumbled backward, her breath quickening. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. As she turned to flee, she saw Drake, Jay-Z, and Travis Scott, their faces twisted, their bodies moving in grotesque ways as if they were being manipulated by invisible strings. But it was too late. The mansion was already closing in on her, the doors locked tight, the shadows creeping closer. Lena ran through the mansion, but no matter how fast she moved, she couldn't escape. Each hallway stretched on forever, the whispers growing louder. Finally, she reached the basement, dark and ominous, with an ancient-looking stone altar in the center, and standing before it, waiting for her, was Diddy. His smile was twisted, no longer the charming grin everyone was used to. It was cold, predatory. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice chillingly calm. This is where we come to feed. Lena tried to back away, but her legs wouldn't move. The whispers enveloped her. They were calling her name. And then, the darkness took over. As she fell to the ground, she realized with horror that she too had become part of the ritual. She would be the next vessel, just like the others. The Diddy freak-off party had never been about the music or the models or the celebrities. It was a gathering for something far darker, feeding on the very essence of fame, and anyone who walked through its doors was never quite the same again. Some say the mansion is still out there, waiting for its next guests, ready to claim them one by one. Tasha had always dreamed of more. More than the dingy strip club, more than the backroom deals and smoky stages where she danced for money. Her friends had warned her about Diddy's freak-off party, but the whispers in the underground circles were too tempting to ignore. The rumors swirled. People came out of it changed in ways that weren't always positive. Some said it was just a wild party. Others claimed it was something darker. But it wasn't the rumors that got to Tasha. It was the invitation. A sleek black envelope slid across her table, shiny and pristine. The text inside was embossed in gold. You're invited to Diddy's exclusive freak-off party. Tonight, we cross every line. Surrender your limits. Only the brave will leave. She didn't have to think twice. Her curiosity, her desire to escape the mundanity of her life, got the better of her. She wanted to be in the presence of the elite, to feel powerful, to be desired. Tasha's heart raced as she drove to the mansion. It was a long, winding road, bordered by dense trees and fog that seemed to hang in the air like a thick, oppressive blanket. When she arrived, the massive gates swung open without a sound, revealing a mansion bathed in red light. The house itself was a strange mix of old grandeur and unsettling modernism, as if it had been built with the intent to both seduce and frighten. The heavy scent of something sweet, perfume maybe, mixed with a tangy, almost metallic smell in the air. Inside it was as if time itself had stopped. The grand chandelier overhead cast an eerie glow over the massive space, and the guests were already mingling, talking in hushed, excited tones. But something felt off. The air was thick, suffocating, like something was hanging just below the surface, waiting to reveal itself. Tasha made her way to the center of the room where Diddy was holding court. He was surrounded by a few A-list celebrities: Drake, Lil Uzi Vert, Kanye West, and others. But his eyes were locked onto her as if he had been waiting. His smile was wide, almost predatory. "Welcome," he said smoothly, his voice low and inviting. "This is a place to shed your past and embrace your true self. Let the night guide you." As the night wore on, Tasha noticed something that began to unnerve her even more. The oil. Bottles of baby oil, large and glistening, were scattered throughout the mansion, almost like they were part of the decor. At first it seemed harmless, just a party gimmick. But as she watched the celebrities, something bizarre began to unfold. Rihanna was the first one to take the plunge. She'd always been known for her sensuality, but tonight, her movements were exaggerated, almost hypnotic. She poured baby oil over her body, letting it drip slowly, the sheen on her skin reflecting the light. The others followed suit. Kanye, Drake, and even the models were soon covered in the oil. But as they all coated themselves in it, Tasha began to notice something unsettling. Their bodies weren't just glistening, they were changing. Kanye's skin looked unnaturally smooth, like it was stretching, almost melting beneath the oil. His movements became erratic, spasming, as if something inside him was trying to break free. Tasha's eyes widened as she saw Lil Uzi Vert, once playful and confident, suddenly jerk backward, his body rigid. He fell to the ground, his skin becoming slick and shiny, his eyes widening with a strange terror. "No! Get it off! Get it off!" he screamed, but his voice sounded distorted, like someone else was speaking through him. Tasha took a step back, feeling the panic rise in her chest. Her fingers gripped the edge of the nearby table as she tried to steady herself. The oil wasn't just changing them, it was possessing them. At this point, the party had turned into something more than just a gathering of stars. The oil, seemingly innocent at first, had become a force, a thing of power that was taking hold of everyone. Tasha tried to push through the crowd, but people were acting strange. Drake's eyes were wide, unblinking, and his movements were unnaturally smooth. He seemed like he wasn't even in control anymore. He grabbed a bottle of baby oil, his hands shaking as he slathered it over his chest and face, grinning maniacally as if the substance had become a drug. A strange chanting started in the background. It wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic, like a pulse. Tasha turned her head toward the stage and saw Diddy standing there, completely covered in oil, his eyes glowing with something otherworldly. "You all thought you were here for fun," he said, his voice deeper now, almost as though it was echoing from somewhere far away. "But tonight, we transcend. The oil is more than just a substance. It's the key to everything, the key to ultimate power." The floor beneath Tasha seemed to vibrate, a low hum reverberating through her chest. Her skin started to tingle, like it, too, wanted to be coated in the oil. She fought the urge, her hands trembling as she moved away from the crowd. By now, the celebrities had become something else. Rihanna, once so poised and self-assured, was now writhing on the floor, her body contorting in ways that defied nature. Her muscles bulged unnaturally, and she let out a guttural cry as she rolled around, her skin glistening with the oily substance that had taken control. Lil Uzi Vert's face was locked in a mask of horror. He was no longer just a person. He was something else. His limbs were twisting like rubber, his body becoming pliable, unrecognizable. Kanye was standing still now, his head tilted back, his eyes completely black, as if the oil had swallowed his soul. The oil had seeped into his body so deeply that he was now a part of it, a grotesque, mutated version of his former self. The others were lost, swallowed by the oil's grip. Their voices, their laughter, were all drowned out by the growing hum of the room, the oil pushing them into a trance. Tasha tried to push forward, but the oil was everywhere now. It coated the walls, dripping from the ceiling, moving like a living thing. She saw a group of thugs who'd been watching from the back, starting to rub oil on their bodies too. Their faces were twisted, a combination of lust and fear, as they slid on the floor like predators hunting their prey. "This isn't real," Tasha whispered to herself, but it didn't help. Her thoughts were becoming clouded. Her breathing quickened as she felt her own skin start to burn. The room was spinning, her body becoming more and more in tune with the oil. Diddy stood at the center, his hands raised in triumph as the crowd around him fell into chaos. People were no longer people. They were vessels for something darker. The oil had taken over, and now it controlled them. Tasha realized too late what was happening. The oil wasn't just a party favor. It wasn't just a sensual lubricant for fun. It was a ritual, a summoning. The oil was alive, feeding on the power and fame of the people who were using it. Her body felt heavy, like the oil was already creeping into her veins, making her move in ways she couldn't control. She reached out for help, but there was no one left to save her. Diddy's face twisted into a smile that was all teeth as he looked at the room full of warped, possessed bodies. "The transformation is complete," he declared. You are all mine. Tasha could feel the darkness pulling her in, the oil whispering to her in voices that sounded like her own thoughts. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her body was no longer her own, her mind fading as the oil consumed her completely. The party, once a promise of excess and indulgence, had become a nightmare. And now, Tasha was part of it, a part of the dark force that had claimed the mansion, the oil, and the very souls of those who dared to enter. The mansion was quiet now, its once glittering rooms empty. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies, just the remnants of an evening that had slipped into madness. But the smell lingered, the sharp, oily scent that seemed to creep through the very walls, filling the air with a sense of dread. And somewhere, deep in the darkness, the oil was waiting for its next victim. It had been a while since Jada received an invitation that made her pulse race. She was no stranger to wild parties, especially those hosted by the elite in the entertainment world. But this one, Diddy's freak-off party, was different. Whispers about it had been circulating for months, rumors of something more than just hedonistic pleasure, of a world where boundaries dissolved and identities blurred. The invitation itself was a dark, sleek card sealed with red wax. When Jada opened it, she read, "Welcome to the freak-off. Tonight, all things are possible, but be warned, once you step inside, you may never be the same. Embrace the chaos. Let go of yourself. Surrender to the night." Her pulse quickened, the strange words stirring something deep inside her. It was an offer she couldn't refuse. To be in the presence of the most famous faces in the world, to witness the kind of excess and indulgence she'd only heard about. Jada knew she was about to step into a world she'd never known. The mansion was located at the edge of a forest, surrounded by trees that seemed to close in around it like an impenetrable wall. The air was thick, heavy with a strange, intoxicating scent, as if the place had been bathed in some unknown essence. It was an old mansion, grand but decaying, as though it had witnessed decades of excess, but now was on the brink of something darker. Jada's car rolled slowly up the long driveway, past towering statues of angels whose eyes seemed to follow her, the stone faces cold and lifeless. The gates opened without a sound, and she stepped out, unsure of what to expect. As she walked toward the grand entrance, the heavy wooden doors swung open, and she was greeted by the sound of thumping bass. The guests were already inside, laughing, talking, dancing. At first glance, it seemed like any other high society gathering. Celebrities mingled with influencers, models, and powerful business figures. Drinks flowed freely, and the air hummed with excitement. But something was wrong. Diddy stood at the center of the room, his ever-confident demeanor making him the unquestioned king of this gathering. He smiled, but there was something unsettling about it, as though his smile was a mask for something deeper, something darker. He wore his usual sharp suit, but his eyes glowed in the dim light, too intense, too focused. Jada glanced around the room and noticed something strange about the guests. The celebrities, those familiar faces that were supposed to be larger than life, weren't themselves. Drake was standing by the bar, his usual cool demeanor replaced with a wild, jittery energy. He was laughing too loud, but the laugh didn't sound like his. It was as though someone else was controlling him, twisting his personality into something unnatural. His eyes darted around the room wide with a strange intensity. Kanye West was near the stage, but he wasn't speaking in his usual eloquent, sometimes erratic way. Instead, he was muttering to himself in low tones, his head shaking slightly as if he was hearing voices. His eyes were wide and unblinking, staring into nothingness. And then there was Rihanna, who normally exuded a magnetic presence. Tonight she seemed absent, almost hollow. Her movements were slow, robotic, as though she were going through the motions without truly being present. She stood by the window, staring out into the night, her face void of emotion, her lips slightly parted, as if she were whispering to the darkness outside. Jada's unease grew. There was something deeply wrong here. The strangest part of the night was the baby oil. Large, gleaming bottles were scattered around the mansion. They weren't just for decoration. They were part of the ritual. At first, Jada assumed it was a party gimmick, something to make the night feel wild, sexy. But the guests were slathering themselves in the oil in ways that felt excessive, compulsive. Drake poured a bottle over his chest, his hands trembling. But it wasn't sensual. It was as if he was being forced to do it, as though his body wasn't his own anymore. He rubbed it in, his skin glistening unnaturally, his eyes vacant. He looked like a man trapped inside his own flesh, desperate to escape, but unable to. Across the room, Kanye did the same, covering himself in the slick substance. His movements were jerky, mechanical, as if the oil had taken control of him, and he was no longer capable of making his own decisions. Jada started to feel the oppressive weight of the oil as it filled the room. It wasn't just on their bodies, it was in the air, thickening the atmosphere, making it heavy and suffocating. She tried to back away, but the oil seemed to be everywhere, crawling across the floor in tendrils, reaching out like something alive. The more people coated themselves in it, the more their behavior shifted. It was as though the oil was not just a substance. It was a force, an entity that took over their minds, warped their very essence. The lights dimmed, and the music grew louder, more distorted. It was a deep, pulsing beat, vibrating through the floor and into Jada's bones. The room seemed to warp and stretch, as though the space itself was bending to some otherworldly will. Rihanna suddenly snapped out of her trance, her eyes widening with fear. She looked around, her voice barely a whisper. "Something's wrong. Something's inside us." But before Jada could respond, the music shifted again, louder this time, like a crescendo rising in the distance. The guests around her were no longer acting like themselves. It wasn't just that they were behaving strangely. It was that they were becoming someone else entirely. Drake's face twisted, his eyes darkening until they were black, reflecting nothing but the void. He began to scream, but it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, guttural, like a predator. "This is mine. I am free." Kanye fell to his knees, his arms raised to the ceiling as the oil pooled around him, pulling him into the floor. His body began to change. His skin stretched, his muscles bulged unnaturally. He transformed before Jada's eyes, not into the man he had been, but into something grotesque, something monstrous. His face split into a grin that was far too wide, his teeth too sharp. Jada stepped back, horror flooding her chest. The room was no longer a party. It had become a nightmare, a twisted scene where the famous faces were merely vessels for something darker, something older. Suddenly, the music stopped. The guests were frozen, their eyes all on Diddy, who stood at the center of the room watching the chaos unfold with an almost serene expression. "You thought you were here for a good time," he said, his voice rich and velvety. "But this is a celebration of power, of transformation. The oil brings us closer to what we really are. It strips away the masks, the false identities, and tonight, you will see the truth." Diddy's eyes gleamed, reflecting the dim light like black mirrors. He raised his hands, and the air seemed to pulse in response. The oil began to move again, swirling around the room, creeping up the walls, across the floor, like it was alive, aware of its own power. The celebrities, no longer in control, were now part of the ritual. Their forms were merging with the oil, their bodies elongating, twisting, growing, until they were barely recognizable as human. Rihanna was the first to collapse, her skin tearing and reforming until all that was left of her was a slick, undulating mass of oil and sinew. Jada wanted to run. She knew she was no longer just a witness. She was part of the ritual now. The oil had already begun to crawl toward her, coating her feet, seeping into her skin. "Join us," Diddy's voice echoed. But it wasn't just him now. The others were speaking too, their voices melding into one. Jada's mind raced. She tried to scream, but her voice was drowned out by the thick, suffocating atmosphere. She was already changing. The last thing she saw before she was consumed was Diddy's smile. A smile full of teeth. A smile that was no longer human. The mansion stood still in the morning light, a place of beauty and decay. The party was over, the guests gone. But something lingered. The scent of oil, sweet and suffocating, clung to the air. The mansion, once alive with music and laughter, was now silent, empty. No one would ever know what happened that night. No one would understand the transformation, the ritual, or what had become of the celebrities who had attended. But somewhere, deep in the shadows, the oil was waiting. And next time, it wouldn't just be the celebrities who answered its call.